You got it?
Yes.
Okay. Someone take this side. Okay. Then my feet took off and my legs went too, so my body was obliged to follow, me with my hands and my mouthful of cress and my throat too dry to swallow. When Manoli roused, she was in a quiet, dark place, and something crooned comfortingly in her ear. She knew it was Beauty, but she wondered how she could be so warm all over. She moved, and her feet felt big, stuffed, and very sore. She must have made some sound because she heard a soft movement, and then the glow in the corner of the room was half unshielded. Are you comfortable? Are your feet painful? The warmth beside Manoli's ear disappeared. Clever Beauty, Manoli thought with approval, after an instant's fear of discovery. Someone was bending over Manoli now, securing the sleeping furs about her shoulders. Someone whose hands were gentle, soothing, who smelled of clean herbs and faintly of numbweed. They only hurt a little, Manoli replied untruthfully, because her feet had taken to throbbing so hard she was... Please don't do that.
Okay.
It drives me insane. Thank you. Because her feet had taken to throbbing so hard she was afraid the woman could hear them. Her soft murmur and her gentle hands denied Manoli's stoicism. You must surely be hungry. You've slept all day. I have? We gave you Fellis juice. You'd run your feet to ribbons. There was a slight hesitation in the woman's voice. They'll be fine in a 7-day. No serious cuts. The quiet voice held a ripple of amusement. Tigran is convinced you're the fastest runner in Pern. I'm not a runner. I'm just a girl. Not just a girl. I'll get you something to eat, and then it's best if you sleep again. Alone, Manoli tried not to think of her throbbing feet and a body which felt stone-heavy, immobile. She worried for fear Beauty or some of the others would come and be discovered by the weir-woman, and what would happen if Lazy with no one to make him hunt for himself, and... I'm Minora, the woman said as she returned with a bowl of steaming stew and a mug. You realize that you're at Bend and Weir? Good. You may stay here, as long as you wish. I can? A relief as intense as the pain in her feet flooded Manoli. Yes, you can. And the firmness of that reply made that right inalienable. Manoli is my name. She hesitated because Minora was nodding. How did you know? Minora motioned for her to continue eating. I've seen you at Half Circle, and the Harper asked the wing leader to keep search for you after you disappeared. We won't discuss that now, Manoli, but I do assure you that you can stay at Benden. Please don't tell them. As you wish. Finish your stew and take all the drink. You must sleep to heal. She left as noiselessly as she'd come, but Manoli was reassured. Minora was head woman at Benden Weir, and what she said was so. The stew was delicious, thick with meat chunks and satisfying with herb flavors. She'd almost finished it when she heard a faint rustle and Beauty returned, piteously broadcasting hunger. With a sigh, Manoli pushed the bowl under the little queen's nose. Beauty licked it dry, then hummed softly and rubbed her face against Manoli's cheek. Where are the others? Manoli asked worriedly. The little queen gave another hum and began to curl herself up in a ball by Manoli's shoulder. She wouldn't have been so relaxed if the others were in trouble, Manoli thought, as she sipped the Fellis juice. Beauty, Manoli whispered, nudging the queen. If anyone comes, you go. You mustn't be seen here, do you understand? The queen rustled her wings irritably. Beauty, you mustn't be seen. Manoli spoke as sternly as she could, and the queen opened one eye, which whirled slowly. Oh, dear, won't you understand? The queen gave a soft, reassuring croon and then closed both lids. The Fellis juice was already melting Manoli's limbs into weightlessness. The dreadful throb of her feet eased. As her eyes relentlessly closed, Manoli had one last thought. How had Beauty known where she was? When Manoli woke, it was to hear faint sounds of children laughing, an infectious laughter that made her grin and wonder what caused such happiness. Beauty was gone, but the space where she'd lain by Manoli's head was warm to the touch. The curtain across the cubicle parted, and a figure was silhouetted against the light beyond. What's the matter with you all of a sudden, Repa? The girl said softly to someone Manoli couldn't see. Oh, all right. I'm well rid of you for now. She turned and saw Manoli looking at her. How do you feel today? As she adjusted the globe for full light, Manoli saw a girl about her own age, dark hair tied primly back from a face that was sad, tired, and oddly mature. Then she smiled and the impression of maturity dissolved. Did you really run across Narat? I really didn't, although my feet feel as if they had. Imagine it. And you hold-bred and out during a fall. There was a grudging respect in her voice. I was running for shelter, Manoli felt obliged to say. Speaking of running, Minora couldn't come to see you herself right now, so you're in my charge. She's told me exactly what to do. And the girl grimaced with such feeling that Manoli had a swift vision of Minora delivering her precise and careful instructions. And I've had a lot of experience. An expression of pain and anxiety crossed her face. Are you Minora's fosterling? Asked Manoli politely. The expression deepened for a moment, and then the girl erased all expression from her face, drawing her shoulders up with pride. No, I'm Brecky's. My name is Miriam. I used to be in the Southern Weir. She made the statement as if that should make all plain to Manoli. You mean in the Southern Continent? Yes, and Miriam sounded irritated. I didn't know anyone lived there. The words were no sooner out of her mouth than Manoli remembered some snippet of information overheard in conversations between Petirian and her father. Where have you been all your life? Demanded Miriam, exasperated. In Half-Circle Seahold, Manoli replied meekly, because she didn't wish to offend the girl. Miriam stared at her. Haven't you heard of it? It was Manoli's turn to be condescending. We have the biggest dock cavern in Pern. Miriam caught her eye, and then both girls began to laugh, the moment in which their friendship began. Look, let me help you to the necessary. You must be bursting. And Miriam briskly threw back the sleeping fur. You just lean on me. Manoli had to, because her feet were incredibly sore, even with Miriam supporting most of her weight. Fortunately, the necessary was no more than a few steps beyond the sleeping cubicle. By the time Manoli crawled back into her bed, she was shaking all over. Stay on your stomach, Manoli. It'll be easier to change your bandages, Miriam said. I haven't had to do many feet, it's true, but if you don't have to see what's going on, that makes it easier. Everyone at Southern said my hands are gentle, and I'll drown your feet in numbweed. Or would you want some more Fellis juice? Minora said you could. Manoli shook her head. Brecky, and here Miriam's voice faltered briefly. Brecky taught me how to change sticky bandages because Oh, dearie me, your feet look just like raw meat. Oops, that's not the right thing to say, but they do. They will be all right, Minora said. And there was such confidence in that statement that Manoli preferred to believe it, too. Now, thread score, that's nasty. You've just lost all the skin on your feet, that's all. But I expect you feel that's quite enough. Sorry, caught you there. Anyway, you'll not even have scars once the new skin grows. And it's really amazing how quickly skin does grow. Or so I've observed. Now, thread score, that's nasty for healing. Never quite fades. Lucky for you, Tigrand's Brant spotted you running. Dragons are very long-sighted, you know. There, now, this should help. Manoli gasped involuntarily as Miriam slathered cool numbweed on her right foot. She'd been biting her lips against the pain while Miriam, with very gentle hands indeed, had removed the blood-caked bandages but the relief from pain was almost a shock. If she'd only lost the skin from her feet, why did they hurt so much more than her hand had? Now, we've only the left foot to go. The numbweed does help, doesn't it? Did you ever have to boil it? Miriam asked with a groan, and as usual, didn't wait for an answer. For 3 days, I just grit my teeth and close my nose and firmly remind myself that it would be so much worse if we didn't have numbweed. I suppose that's the bad with the good Minora's always saying we have to have. But you'll be relieved to know that there's no sign of infection. Infection? Manoli jerked herself up on her elbows, craning her head about. Will you keep still? Miriam glared so authoritatively that Manoli forced herself to relax. All she could see of her feet were salve-smeared heels. And you're very, very lucky there isn't any infection. After all, you'd been running shoeless over sand, dirt, and goodness knows what. It took us forever to wash the grit off. Miriam made a sympathetic sound. Just as well we dosed you good. You're sure there's no infection this time? This time? You haven't done this before, have you? Miriam's voice was shocked. No, not my feet. My hand. And Manoli turned on her side, holding out her scarred hand. She was considerably gratified by the concerned pity in Miriam's face as she examined the wound. How ever did you do that? I was gutting pagtail and the knife slipped. You were lucky to miss the tendons. Miss? Well, you are using those fingers. A bit drawn, that scar, though. Miriam clucked her tongue with professional dismay. Don't think much of your hold's nursing, if that's any sample. Pagtail slime is difficult. As bad as thread score in its own way, Manoli muttered, perversely defending her hold. Be that as it may, and Miriam gave the foot bandage a final twitch. We'll see you don't have any such trouble with your feet. Now I'll bring you something to eat. You must be starved. Now that the worst of the dressing was over and the numbweed had deadened the pain in her feet, Manoli was definitely aware of the emptiness in her stomach. So I'll be right back, Manoli, and if you need anything after that, just shout for Sandra. She's below on the floor minding the little ones, and she knows she's to listen for you. As Manoli worked her way through the generous meal Miriam brought, she reflected on some harsh truths. Definitely Mavi had given her the distinct impression that she'd never be able to use her hand again. Yet Mavi was too skilled a healer not to have known that the knife had missed the finger tendons. She had deliberately let the hand heal with drawn flesh. It was painfully clear to Manoli that Mavi, as well as Yanis, had not wanted her to be able to play again. Grimly, Manoli vowed that she'd never return to Half Circle. Her reflections made her doubt Minora's assurance that she could stay at Bend and Weir. No matter, she could run away again. Run she could and live homeless, and that's what she'd do. Why, she'd run across all Pern. And why not? Manoli became pleased with the notion. Indeed, there was nothing to stop her running right to the Master Harper Hall in Fort Hold. Maybe Patirian had sent her songs to Master Harper Robinson. Maybe they were more than just twiddles. But there was no maybe about returning to Half Circle Hold. That she would not do. The issue did not arise over the next few days while her feet itched. Miriam said that was a good sign of healing. And she waving? And she found herself beginning to fret with impatience at her disability. She also worried about her fire lizards now she wasn't able to forage for them. But the first evening when Beauty reappeared, her little eyes darting about the chamber to be sure Manoli was alone, there was nothing of hunger in her manner. She daintily accepted the morsels that Manoli had carefully saved from her supper. Rocky and Diver appeared just as she was drifting off to sleep. However, they promptly curled themselves up to sleep against the small of her back, which they wouldn't have done if they'd been hungry. They were gone the next morning, but Beauty lingered, stroking her head against Manoli's cheek until she heard footsteps in the corridor. Manoli shooed her away, telling her to stay with the others. I know it's boring to stay abed, Miriam agreed the third morning with a weary sigh that told Manoli Miriam would gladly have swapped places, but it's kept you out of Les's way. Since the... Well, and Miriam censored what she'd been about to say. With Ramoth brooding over those eggs, we're all treading hot sands until they hatch, so it's better you're here. There must be something I can do now that I'm better. I'm good with my hands. And then Manoli, too, halted uncertainly. You could help Sandra with the little ones, if you would. Can you tell any stories? Yes, And Manoli all but blurted out what she'd done at the sea hold. Can at least keep them amused. Weir-bred children were not like hold children, Manoli discovered. They were more active physically, possessed of insatiable curiosity for every detail she cared to tell them about fishing and sailing. It was only when she taught them to fashion tiny boats of sticks and wide root leaves and sent them off to sail the skiffs in the Weir Lake that she had any rest the first morning. In the afternoon, she amused the younger ones by recounting how Tigrand had rescued her. Thread was not as automatically horrifying to Weir children as it would be to Holders, and they were far more interested in her running and rescue than in what she was running from. Unconsciously, she fell into a rhyming pattern and caught herself up sharply just before she'd conceived a tune. The children didn't seem to notice, fortunately, and then it was time to peel tubers for the evening meal. It was difficult to subdue that little tune as she worked. Really, it had exactly the cadence of her running stride. Oh! Did you cut yourself? Asked Sandra from the other side of the table. No, replied Manoli, and she grinned with great good humor. She had just realized something very important. She wasn't in the sea hold any longer, and no one here knew about her harpering. Likewise, no one would know if it were her own song she hummed when she felt like humming. So she began to hum her running song, and was doubly pleased with herself because the tune matched her pairing strokes too. "It's a relief to hear someone happy," remarked Sandra, smiling encouragingly at Manoli. Manoli realized then that she had been vaguely aware all day of the fact that the atmosphere in the living cavern reminded her of those times when the fishing fleet was overdue in a storm and everyone was waiting. Miriam was very worried about Brecky, but she wouldn't say why, and Manoli was reluctant to broach the girl's sad reserve. "I'm happy because my feet are healing," she told Sandra, and then hurried on. "But I wish someone would tell me what's wrong with Brecky. I know Miriam's worried sick about her." Sandra stared at Manoli for a moment. "You mean you haven't heard about—" She lowered her voice and glanced about to make sure they weren't overheard. "About the queens?" "No. No one tells girls anything in this heat hold." Sandra looked surprised but accepted the explanation. "Well, Brecky used to be at Southern. You did know that? Good. And when Flour vanished all the rebellious old-timers to Southern, the Southerners had to go somewhere. Tabor became weir leader at Fort Hold. Kalara," and Sandra's usually gentle voice became hard, "Kalara was weirwoman for Predith, with Becky and Wirinth." Sandra was having enough trouble telling the tale, so Manoli was very glad she hadn't asked Miriam. "Wirinth rose to mate, but Kalara," and the name was spoken with intense hatred, "Kalara hadn't taken Predith far enough away. She was close to mating too, and when Wirinth flew the bronzes, she rose and—" There were tears in Sandra's eyes, and she shook her head, unable to continue. "Both queens died?" Sandra nodded. "Brecky's alive, though, isn't she?" "Kalara lost her mind, and we're desperately afraid that Brecky will lose hers." Sandra mopped the tears from her face, sniffing back her sorrow. "Poor Miriam. And she's been so good to me." Sandra sniffed again, this time from pique. "Miriam likes to think she's got the cares of the weir on her shoulders. Well, I've a lot more respect for her the way she keeps on going when she's worried sick than if she crept off someplace and just felt sorry for herself." Sandra stared at Manoli. "No need to bristle at me, girl, and if you keep on stabbing your knife that way, you will cut yourself." "Will Brecky be all right?" asked Manoli after a few minutes' strict attention to her peeling. "We hope so," but Sandra didn't sound confident. "No, we do. You see, Ramoth's clutch is about to hatch, and Lessa is certain that Brecky could impress the queen. You see, she can speak to any of the dragons, the way Lessa can, and Grawl and Bird are always with her. Here comes Miriam." Manoli had to admit that Miriam, who only numbered the same turns as she did assume an officious manner. She could understand that an older woman like Sandra might not take kindly to it, yet Manoli had no fault to find with Miriam's ministrations, and she let the girl bustle her off to the cubicle to change the bandages. "You've been on them all day, and I want to be sure no dirt's in the scabs," she said briskly. Manoli obediently lay on her stomach in the bed, and then tentatively suggested that perhaps tomorrow she could change her own bandages and save Miriam some work. "Don't be silly. Feet are very awkward, but you're not. You should just hear Kataro complain. He got thread scored during the last fall. You'd think he was the only one ever in the world scored. And besides, Minora said I was to take care of you. You're easy. You don't moan, groan, complain, and swear like Kataro. Now these are healing nicely, in spite of the way it might feel to you. Minora says that feet hurt worse than any part of your body but hands. That's why it seems much worse to you, I expect." Manoli had no argument and breathed a sigh of relief that the painful session was now over. "You taught the weirlings how to make those little boats, didn't you?" Manoli flipped over, startled, and wondering if she'd done wrong, but Miriam was grinning. "You should have seen the dragons snorting them about the lake." Miriam giggled. "Having the grandest time. I haven't laughed so much in weeks. There you are." And Miriam bustled away on some errand. The following day, Miriam hovering beside her, Manoli walked slowly and not too painfully through the living cavern and into the main kitchen cavern for the first time. "Ramoth's eggs are just about to hatch," Miriam told her as she placed Manoli at one of the work tables along the backside of the huge cave. Nope, you're gonna knock the light over.
That is very much true.
There's nothing wrong with your hands, and we'll need all the help we can get for the feast. And maybe your brekkie will be better? Oh, she's got to be, Manoli. She's got to be. Miriam scrubbed her hands together anxiously. If she isn't, I don't know what will become of her and Fnor. He cares so much. Menor's as worried about him as she is about Brekkie. It'll all come right, Miriam. I'm sure it will, Manoli said, putting all the confidence she could muster into her voice. Do you really think so? Miriam dropped her pose of bustling efficiency and was briefly a young, bewildered girl in need of reassurance. I most certainly do. And Manoli was angry with Sandra's unkind statements the day before. Why, when I thought I'd be scored to death, Tigran appeared. And when I thought they'd all be threaded... Manoli hastily shut her mouth, frantically trying to think of something to fill that gap. She'd almost told Miriam about saving the fire lizards. They must belong to somebody, a man said in a loud, frustrated tone of voice. 2 dragon riders entered the kitchen cavern, slapping dusty gloves against sandy boots and loosening their riding belts. They could be attracted by the ones we have, Tigellin. Considering how badly we need the creatures in the egg, it's a raking nuisance to have a whole flaming fair that no one will claim. The next thing Manoli knew, Beauty appeared over her head, gave a terrified squawk, and landed on Manoli's thinly clad shoulder. Beauty wrapped her tail, choking tight about Manoli's neck, and buried her face into her hair. Rocky and Diver seized the cloth of her shirt in their claws, struggling to burrow into her arms. The air was full of frightened fire lizards diving at her, and Miriam, who made no attempt to defend herself, stared with utter amazement at Manoli. Miriam! Do they belong to you after all? Cried Tigellin as he strode toward their table. No, they're not mine. Miriam pointed to Manoli. They're hers. Manoli was speechless, but she managed to contain Rocky and Diver. The others took refuge on ledges above her, broadcasting fear and uncertainty. She was just as confused as the fire lizards, because why were they in the weir? And the weir seemed to know about fire lizards, and we'll soon know whose they are, said a woman's angry voice, carrying clearly in the pause. A small, slim woman in riding gear came striding purposefully into the main section of the kitchen cavern. I asked Ramoth to speak to them. She was followed by another rider. Over here, Lessa, Tigellin said, beckoning, but his gaze did not leave Manoli's. At the sound of that name, she struggled out of the chair, with the fire lizard squawking and trying to retain their balance and hold on to her. All Manoli could think of was to keep out of Lessa's way, but she got tangled up in the chairs about the table and painfully stubbed her toes. Miriam grabbed her arm, trying to make her sit down, and there seemed to be more fire lizards than Manoli could claim, circling over her head and chittering wildly. Will someone quiet this lot? Demanded the small, dark woman, confronting Manoli, her fists on her riding belt, eyes snapping with anger. Ramoth, if you would. Abruptly, complete silence reigned in the huge kitchen cavern. Manoli felt Beauty trembling more violently than ever against her neck, and the talons of the 2 bronzes dug into her arms and side. That's better, said Lessa, her eyes brilliant. And who are you? Are these all yours? My name is Manoli, please, and Manoli glanced up nervously at all the fire lizards perched silently with whirling eyes on ledges and hanging from the ceiling. Not all of these are mine. Manoli? Some of Lessa's anger abated in her perplexity. Manoli? She was trying to place the name. Minora told you about her, Lessa, said Miriam, which Manoli thought greatly daring and very much appreciated. Tigran rescued her from Threadfall. She'd run her feet raw. Ah, yes. So, Manoli, how many fire lizards do look to you? Manoli was trying to figure out whether Lessa was annoyed or pleased, and if she had too many fire lizards, would she be sent back to Half Circle? She felt Miriam prod her in the ribs. These, Manoli indicated the 3 clinging to her, and felt Miriam dig her again, and only 6 of those up there. Only 6 of those up there? Manoli saw Lessa's fingers drumming on her white riding belt. She heard one of the dragon riders muffling a sound, and glancing up saw that he had his hand over his mouth, but his eyes were dancing with laughter. Then she dared look at Lessa's face and saw the slight smile on the weirwoman's face. That makes 9, I think, Lessa said. Just how did you contrive to impress 9 fire lizards, Manoli? I didn't contrive. I was in the cave when they hatched, and they were hungry, you see. I had a sack full of spider claws, so I fed them. Cave? Where? Lessa's words were crisp but not unkind. On the coast, above Nerat by the Dragonstones. Tegelen uttered an exclamation. You were living in that cave? I found jars and pots, no sign of fire lizard shells. I didn't think fire lizards clutched in caves, Lessa remarked. It was only because the tide was high and the clutch would have been washed away. I helped the queen put them into the cave. Lessa regarded Manoli steadily for a long moment. You helped the fire lizard? Yes. You see, I'd fallen over the cliff, and they, the queen and her bronzes from the old clutch, not these here, and Manoli jerked her chin at Beauty, Rocky, and Diver, they wouldn't let me get off the beach until I helped them. Tegelen was staring at her, but the other 2 riders were grinning broadly. Then Manoli saw that Miriam, too, was smiling with delight. More unbelievable to Manoli in her confusion was the fact that a little brown fire lizard was perched on Miriam's shoulder, intently staring at Beauty, who wouldn't take her head out of Manoli's hair. I'd like to hear the whole story in sequence one day, Lessa said. Right now, will you please keep your lot under control and with you? They're upsetting Ramoth and all the others. 9, eh? And Lessa sighed, turning away. When I think where I could use 9 eggs to good purpose. Please, do you need more fire lizard eggs? Lessa whirled so fast that Manoli took an involuntary backward step. Of course we need fire lizard eggs. Where have you been that you didn't know? She turned to Tegelen. Your wing leader, didn't you inform all the sea holds? Yes, I did, Lessa. And Tegelen looked straight at Manoli now. Just about the time Manoli first disappeared from her hold. Right, Manoli? The sweep riders have been on the lookout for her ever since, but she was holed up snug as you please in that cave with 9 fire lizards. Manoli hung her head in despair. Please, weirwoman, don't send me back to Half-Circle Hold. A girl who can impress 9 fire lizards, said Lessa in a sharp, rippling tone that made Manoli look up, does not belong in a sea hold. Tegelen, find out from Manoli where that clutch is and secure it for us immediately. Let us fervently hope it hasn't hatched. To Manoli's intense relief, Lessa actually smiled at her, obviously...
Bug that isn't a fly.
Where?
It's the color of the wood.
Okay, we'll deal with that in a minute.
No.
Oh my god, fine. We'll pause, and then we'll deal with it. Lessa actually smiled at her, obviously in a much improved temper. Remember to keep those... Please stop. Pesky creatures away from her moth. Miriam can help you train them. Hers are quite useful now. Hey, stop.
Bah, I look pretty.
You do look pretty, but it's very distracting.
I look pretty.
Yeah, you can make faces in a mirror later.
But I look
You can make faces...
Lights.
Oh my god. Chaz,
What?
do I need to count?
Lights.
1.
5.
She swept away, leaving the entire cavern breathless. Activity suddenly picked up on all sides of the kitchen. Manoli felt Miriam pressing her into a chair. She sank weakly down. She found a cup of claw in her hand and heard Tegelen urging her to take a few sips. One's first encounter with Lessa is apt to be unnerving. She's so small, Manoli said dazedly. Size is irrelevant. Manoli turned anxiously to Miriam. Did she really mean it? I can stay, Miriam? If you can impress 9 fire lizards, you belong here. But why didn't you tell me about them? Didn't you see mine? I've only the 3. Tegelen clicked his tongue at Miriam, who stuck hers out at him. I told mine to stay in the cave. And here we've been racking our brains, Miriam went on, accusing riders of hoarding eggs. I didn't know you people needed fire lizards. Miriam, stop teasing her. She's unnerved. Manoli, drink your claw and relax, Tegelen told her. Manoli obediently sipped her claw, but she felt obliged to explain about the boys in her sea hold who could think of nothing but snaring fire lizards, and she felt so strongly that that was wrong that she hadn't even mentioned seeing them mating. Under the circumstances, you did just as you should, Manoli said to Tegelen, but let's get to that clutch and rescue it. Where did you see it? How close do you think it is to hatching? The eggs were still pretty soft when I found them the day Chagrin rescued me.
Oh,
Hold on, we're gonna finish this first.
but
The day Chagrin rescued me, and it's about a half morning's walk from the Dragonstones. A few minutes glide by Dragonback, but south, north, where? Well, south, where a stream feeds into the sea. Tagellin raised his eyes in exasperation. That describes too many places. You'd better... Please stop. You'd better come with me. You waving your hand in my face.
but it's fun.
Tagellin, Miriam sounded shocked. Manoli's feet are in shreds. So is Lessa's temper. We'll wrap her feet in hides, but we must get those eggs. And you're not head woman yet, my girl, Tagellin said, waggling a finger at Miriam. It didn't take long to outfit Manoli. Miriam, as if to make up for her officiousness, brought her own warehide riding jacket and headgear and a pair of vastly oversized boots. They were eased over Manoli's sore and bandaged feet and fastened tightly around her legs with leather strips. Rocky and